Hello and welcome to Speaking Out on Financial Abuse, stories of survival and hope after financial abuse in a marriage or romantic partnership. I'm your host, Lori G., and I'm happy to welcome a guest who is a true innovator in the field of supporting survivors of domestic abuse. As we continue to bring more awareness and resources to supporting survivor recovery, is there any hope at all that something out there can bring recovery along with accountability to the abuser itself? Here today to discuss a new voluntary program she helped pioneer herself for perpetrators of domestic abuse and to talk about the historic organization of which she is at the helm is Sophora Acheson. Sophora is the executive director and co-board president of Ruby's Place, a large California domestic violence organization that brings wide-reaching recovery resources to survivors throughout the Bay Area. Sophora, very cool to have you here. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, where in the world are you and where are you originally from?
Where in the world am I right now? I'm sitting in Northern California in a town called Santa Rosa, just above the San Francisco Bay. And I am not originally from here. I am originally from a small town. I think most people would know it as the foothills of Tahoe in a place called Grass Valley. And yes, it is very green and grassy and full of trees. And as a teenager, I was absolutely bored out of my mind.
Yeah, I get that. Beautiful green lawns, nothing to do.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, you have a huge job in a huge city and in a huge populated part of the country. You serve as executive director and co-board president for this large domestic violence resource in California. Let's go back to the beginning. How did you become passionate about helping survivors of abuse?
Well, I can tell you right now, we could probably do a whole podcast episode about that. But to kind of give you...
I'm up for that.
Give you a summarized timeline, it really started with my own experience. So I definitely identify as a survivor of domestic violence, childhood abuse, and among some other things. And growing up in a really violent household with a father who was physically, emotionally, mentally abusive, I got to see firsthand what it's like for children, what it was like for my mom to be in a place where you never felt safe. And that obviously incredibly impacted me. And that really started my journey into the mental health world. So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I knew that I wanted to go into the helping profession. I had no idea, even as a young adult, that there were jobs out there that were specifically for helping survivors of domestic violence. But as I was in early college, I met a man and quickly got into a relationship with him and was right back into the cycle of domestic violence and was quite ashamed and saddened and felt trapped and really felt like I had nowhere to turn because it was embarrassing. And
because you feel unique. Like this is, I'm the only one dumb enough to be in this situation.
Yes, correct. Yes. And so that comes with all of the feelings and all of the shame. Was able to put together all the things that I needed to be able to get out of that relationship. And I found myself in the Bay Area of California, really starting my life over. Still wondering, did I actually want to be a therapist? Going through my own healing journey and really looking for what was actually next. And I was looking through the job ads and I saw this job for a counselor position at a local domestic violence organization. And it was for a counselor to go and essentially do bedside advocacy. So whether it was through law enforcement, police station, or hospitals, I would be the one that would go there and really help the victim or survivor in the moment of crisis. And I thought, well, if anybody knows what that's like, I can do that job. And I had the credentials, and that started the entire journey for me into this field of interpersonal violence. I was in direct service with Ruby's Place, where I started 14 years ago.
Wow.
And spent half of that time, 7 years in direct service, working with survivors in various different positions. And then 7 years ago, I got the opportunity to actually become the executive director of our organization.
And you also serve as co-board president. So you oversee a great deal of programs, a great deal of survivors coming in and out. And Ruby's Place itself is a significant Bay Area domestic violence organization, and it does serve such a wide area of survivors. How did Ruby's Place itself start? And how did it become such a critical resource for the Bay Area?
I absolutely love this story and the history of our organization. It's actually one of the reasons I think that keeps me really rooted here at this particular organization. But our founder was a woman in the early 70s who really was looking around at the height of the battered women's movement and noticing that there's nowhere for her friends or her acquaintances to go when they needed to leave a domestic violence situation. And so she convinced her husband at that time to open up their home and a couple of bedrooms that they had in their own personal house to make it a shelter. And what she didn't know at that time was that she actually created the nation's first domestic violence shelter. And it was incorporated in 1971. And we've obviously grown pretty significantly since then. We've added many beds. We now, in the state of California alone, have over 103 beds for all the
that's huge.
Yes, for all the different sort of populations of survivors. We serve women with children, men with children. We also serve minors. We are also in the state of Colorado and quickly moving into the state of Delaware. And so, yeah, our history is really important to us. It's an incredible legacy. And that shelter that she created still stands today. Unequivocally, there is a tether to my heart in this work, and particularly this organization. You know, I do feel like I grew up professionally in this organization, learning what it is that the broad spectrum of survivors need, all of the nuances about it, and how do you actually advocate and really bring the domestic violence field along with the new times. What we do is a very human thing, and relationships are the most important part of my job in terms of, over the past decade, building a community of people that know who I am, but also really know who Ruby's Place is and what we're actually about. I can definitely contribute to our success for sure.
And it must be just something else to keep up with all the changes in technology, both on the recovery side and on the predator side. And
100%,
yes. Just in the last 10 to 15 years, we now have so many ways of stalking people. I went through this myself, where a GPS tracking device was discovered in my car a full year after my divorce. And to be able to keep up with that, what can predators do? And then try to put preventative measures in place. And that sounds like it just comes with a lot of education. And I know you guys offer a lot of different programs to make people more savvy about how to protect themselves. But I really want to discuss a very unusual and very unique service that Ruby's Place offers. And you call it the R.A.F.T program, R.A.F.T. And you pioneered this project personally. I think you developed this in a very unique and very interesting and creative way. How did the R.A.F.T program start? Well, what is it and how did it start?
So the R.A.F.T program stands for Restorative Action for Family Transformation. And essentially what it is looking at, if we flipped the traditional victim services on its head for the cases where it is safe for the victim and children to remain in the home, and remove the person who's doing harm and have them come to a facility where they are surrounded by services that really focus on, one, accountability for the harm that you're doing to yourself and to other people. And then looking at the trauma that really has happened in that person's life that has brought them to the place where using harm seems to be the only option, and really breaking down that trauma and how they got to using coping skills such as hurting other people. And then looking at behavior change. So very similar to the substance use disorder field, when we look at using substances as a way of coping, we look at harm as a way of coping. And then how do we actually help that person start to change their behavior and get them new tools? So that's one pillar. The other pillar of R.A.F.T is then making sure that the victim and children are still provided all of those same resources and support services while they are going through a very traumatic time. We like to do that in the home so that they can stay stabilized. They're not living in a shelter where they're sharing rooms with other people and going through a whole new traumatic experience, making sure that, they have the counseling and all of the things that they need in their own healing process. And then the third pillar of R.A.F.T is around reconciliation. And I want to be clear that reconciliation doesn't always mean that the couple reunites, because sometimes it's not safe. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's not what the couple actually wants to do.
It's just too late for some people.
Exactly. And in my case, it was absolutely too late. And if you would have even mentioned reconciliation to me, I would have been like, you're nuts. I'm out of here. And sometimes it simply looks like co-parenting. How does two people co-parent without hurting each other and without hurting the children? And there's a lot of restorative justice tools that we use in that. And that process is actually led by the victim. So we are not asking them to come in and do anything that is unsafe or that they are actually not leading the process in. So those are the three pillars of R.A.F.T. And that is the program in a nutshell. And it really stemmed from about 10 years ago when I was still in direct service and still going through my own healing journey, many years outside of my own domestic violence and stalking experience, but still really reeling from the trauma. I was seeing in our shelter the same women come through over and over and over again. And I know domestic violence is not a one incident, or leaving a domestic violence situation is not a event. It's a process. Mm-hmm. So yes, that is normal. But then the other thing that we started seeing were different women coming in with the same abuser. And that got me really thinking.
Wow, that's amazing. A revolving door of a single predator with revolving doors of women. That's crazy.
And thinking about the spider web effect of how one person who continuously uses harm in their relationship can just impact so many lives. And that really brought me back to thinking about my own person in my life who had done harm, both my father and my ex. And would they ever actually break the cycle? Would they actually ever stop harming? Or are they out there essentially creating more victims? And so I thought, okay, for sure, there has to be a program out there that is addressing the abuser side of things, the perpetrator side of things. And so I searched the United States pretty heavily for a couple of years. I found some better intervention programs here or there, but really the recidivism rates of that were actually very high, unfortunately. And so I was at a conference overseas, and of course the Netherlands, because they have all of the cool stuff, was talking about a program that they were running, which is very similar to what I just described R.A.F.T is. And it really, the light bulb kind of turned on. I approached them and said, I would love to hear more about your program. And they said, well, actually, contact New Zealand because they are the originators of this program. So I randomly phoned up the people in New Zealand thinking there's no way that they're going to respond to me. And they picked up the phone and I said, hi, I'm calling from the US. We have a major issue over here. And I'm wondering if I could talk to you about this. And they not only said, yes, you could talk to us, but they invited us over to New Zealand to spend significant time with them, to learn about their program, shadow them, meet their police force and how they work with law enforcement around this, hear from survivors and abusers themselves. And while I was over there, I walked into one of their shelter facilities for those that do harm. And on the wall, it was the quote from Desmond Tutu. And I'm probably not going to get the exact words right, but essentially it said, at some point, we have to stop pulling people out of the river and that being the only thing. We need to actually go upriver and see why they're falling in the first place. And it totally made sense to me that, yes, we will probably always need the crisis intervention services of domestic violence shelters and the intervention work that we do. But there has to be a way that we go to the source and try to break the cycle there. And that was going straight to the people that did harm. And so 3 years ago, I brought R.A.F.T to the United States with the 3 pillars and launched the program. And we have been seeing amazing results from our participants. Great. It is completely voluntary. So I was actually really nervous because I thought, oh my gosh, there's no way anybody is going to be like, hey,
I want to sign up for that.
Yeah, I want to sign up
Tell my
for that.
family and friends.
Yes, I'm hurting my partner. Please, let's like publicly, talk about it. Well, to my surprise, within 2 weeks of us opening the residential facility, we were full, and we have been full since.
Do you find that men that come in, because we're talking about men that come into this program predominantly, do you find that they do have an awareness when they come in that they've been committing harm, or do they tend to be oblivious to the fact that they've been causing anybody any harm?
So the short answer to that is they know that they have behavior that is getting them in trouble, but the accountability typically isn't there right when they come in. And what I mean by that is we often have men who come to us that say, I'm about to lose my kids because CPS has been called for the third time because domestic violence situations, or I'm about to lose my spouse, like they have moved out and I know that there's issues with our behavior or the behavior of the relationship, or I know there's issues, or they've been arrested for domestic violence and been released, but they can't go back home. So they're aware that there is an issue, but putting the pieces together that, I have some real inner work to do around my own behavior and my own trauma, that typically doesn't come until like 60 to 90 days in, where we really start getting under the surface.
So they come in with little accountability until that moment. And you're providing, in some cases, the very first accountability they've ever had, because you were saying, what's unusual about your program is that it's voluntary, as you said. Now, there are programs I have seen that are in the similar vein, but they are mandated programs, similar to being arrested for drunk driving and being ordered to AA. Yes. They're actually ordered to these programs. I'm just assuming that they would have a less of a success rate for the same reason that drug and alcohol recovery is a lower success rate with people that are ordered to go into the program. How do you think you said you were worried about volunteers even doing it, but now that it's been successful, now that you're seeing results from this, how do you think somebody learns accountability in R.A.F.T?
That's a wonderful question. And you absolutely hit the nail on the head when you said, just like in the recovery field, force somebody into rehab, the chances of actual long-term recovery are much less than the person has really hit what they would call their rock bottom and has decided, I'm going to do something differently. It is such a parallel process when you are talking about those that do harm. The person has to hit a quote unquote wall or rock bottom where the thought of losing my kids legitimately is the thing that I'm going to go in and see, can this program actually help me? Or my spouse has moved out, or my partner is gone and I may never get them back. And that's the point at which I'm going to see who out there can help me. Or I've been arrested for the third time, and next time I get arrested, I'm going to prison, kind of thing. And I think the aha moment, at least some of the ones that I have witnessed, and this has also been in my own journey, because we all do harm. Even the best of us do harm unbeknownst to us. We're human. That's part of our nature, is conflict, rupture, repair, conflict, rupture, repair. But in situations where people are causing significant harm, the aha moment comes when we actually look at their own trauma and the person who has done harm to them.
And I would assume men have a difficult time talking about growing up in a household of domestic violence, growing up with a brutal father or a sexually abusive parent or a relative who has been a problem that their parents aren't doing anything about. And that seems to be a lot of it, breeds a lot of rage. And I mean, that seems like the core is like, where's the rage coming from?
When they look at their own trauma, and it's done in a very gentle way, we don't like sort of rip the cover back and say, let's look at all the skeletons, but it's done a lot through writing exercises and a curriculum that we actually have that gently helps them look at the trauma and the harm that's been caused against them. And really, when we get down to it and we talk about, look, it is not your fault that you have been hurt, but it is your responsibility to heal that hurt. And part of that healing is about your behavior and how you handle it.
So a couple that is under domestic domestic violence that is married. The male can join the R.A.F.T program, and then the wife has separate resources that you provide in order for her to recover. How much overlap is there with that?
We have seen incredible crossover, but we get a lot of our referrals actually from victims who access our case management or advocacy services or shelter services that say, whoa, wait a second, there's actually a program for my partner that's not within the justice system. And then we get a referral where typically the husband or the partner is calling in saying, hey, I hear there's some things that maybe you guys could help me with around this. It is separate in the beginning because one, we have to make sure that we are not putting either person in a place where violence is going to be escalated.
Or where they can't talk.
Exactly. And that there can be actual communication. But once we get it to a place where communication is flowing much better, behavior change is consistent, we then do talk about what is that reconciliation piece. And again, that is led very much by the victim because they are the person that has had the harm done against them and has the safety concerns. And so many of our survivor clients, though, want to be in communication and want to be in conversation with the person that has done them harm, even if it's to say, I want to have a dialogue back and forth so that I can express the impact that you've had on me. And that is done in a very controlled environment with very trained staff around this. But to answer your question and kind of bring it back around, in the beginning, it is separate, very separate. And then towards the end, it is a very collaborative community healing process that happens.
And as you were saying, they may not reconcile, but this man may now have gained the skills to move on to a healthy relationship and to be a healthy parent, to be responsible for his family.
Yes.
And just provide, it sounds like you're providing structure and at the same time providing a voice for you're not excusing him. You're not saying, let me help you come up with excuses for this. Because I can see why a survivor might think that.
Right.
Are you going to just tell him he had a bad childhood and therefore he got to do this? That's not at all what you're doing.
No.
That this accountability is important to have a voice. But I think what's so amazing about this R.A.F.T program is that you're also giving a voice to the abuser side. And that there may be a story there that is worth hearing.
Research shows us that the majority of people who cause harm or become abusers were once traumatized and abused themselves. Now, like you said, that is absolutely not an excuse. And we made that explicitly clear that we all have harm and trauma that we've experienced in our lives. That doesn't mean that you have the right to then pass that harm along to others. But it does give us a starting point to say why this is showing up in their life. And it gives us the root of the problem to work with. And the other thing that I would say is there are definitely survivors that say to us, I absolutely want nothing to do with my past partner. And we 100% respect that. And if somebody said, hey, Sophora, do you want to have a victim offender dialogue with your ex? I would say, take a hike, never want to talk to that person again. Absolutely not.
I'm with you, girl.
That is not where I am at in my healing journey. And that is 100% okay. But if you also told me that he was in the R.A.F.T program, I would have so much hope that he would never do this to somebody else again.
Because it's voluntary, because he's choosing to come into the program and say, I have a problem. And I think that is all the difference in the world. And again, as we're saying, is being ordered into something and choosing something is not at all the same world.
Correct. It makes a very big difference in the success rates.
I think it's fantastic what you're doing. This has been a very effective program. And Sophora is definitely someone to talk to about it and how to build something like this, because we really do ultimately want people to be healthy. This is the aim of what you're doing. And you do so many other things. You offer a mobile health programs for survivors of domestic violence and 9 area counties, I believe, which is a pretty huge population to serve. What does the mobile health program provide for survivors of domestic violence?
This came out of really looking at making sure that domestic violence victims and survivors actually had access to medical health. And the services that we primarily provide are those basic checkups. So a lot of folks, they have been in survival mode and they have not seen a doctor for a long long time. They may want an STD test. They may want just a general checkup. I haven't had my blood pressure taken, or I think I might be struggling with diabetes, insulin, checking all of those things to really get them kind of a baseline health screening is the main point of this program. And then additionally, connecting them in with those community medical resource offices. So a lot of folks are moving to different communities as they're leaving domestic violence situations. And so being that warm handoff to introduce them to where should they go? Where is their new doctor's office? Another thing that has really come up is dental care. That has seemed to be at the top of the list for people, and their request is, hey, I haven't been to the dentist in years. That has been the last thing on my mind. And then also for the kiddos, having them get their school screenings and their sports checkups and all of that so they can also have a baseline health screening of anything that needs to be addressed with them. And then really it's about, for parents, they've really enjoyed the education piece. Like, what fever is high enough that I need to take my kid to the hospital? How much formula should I be feeding a newborn? So really that personal resource that folks can go to in a time of crisis when they are living in a shelter or out in the community that they're really not used to.
And, going by my own experience, you go and get help physically when you're in mental crisis only when it becomes critical. And you tend to go where you have medical insurance or where you can get paid. Dental doesn't fall in that category.
No, it does not.
You put off the things that you can't quickly do, easily fix, take an antibiotic, it's all over. And these are, as you know, these things become very, very serious over time.
Yes, they do.
Poor dental health could kill anybody. To just have, it must be wonderful just to have that oversight for somebody who's home.
Yes, it is. We've had a lot of clients tell us that this is an amazing service, that when they're in a shelter where it's a foreign place to live, they don't know anybody, they don't have their community resources around them, to have somebody actually come in and check on them and say, hey, here's all the things. Can I offer you this screening? When's the last time you've been to a dentist? Let's, get you a dental checkup. They have just said, wow, I never would have thought about that in this time, which goes to your point of that just falls to the bottom of our priority list.
Oh, heck yeah.
Crisis.
Is this for people who are necessarily homebound or just people who are at home because they're got kids?
Yeah, it's really anybody who's going through a domestic violence situation. We go to a lot of shelters, and we also do at-home visits. We also set up shop in school parking lots. We also will do community days where we will let people know, hey, this Saturday, we are going to be at the local Trader Joe's grocery store. Stop by and come see us. We do diaper giveaways and formula giveaways and groceries and different things. So even if the person is hey, I'm not quite there yet, I'm not quite there to where I can handle full medical checkup, they can still hear about the services and get some resources.
Yeah, start thinking about it at least.
Yes.
And knowing that they have options. And I think that's one of the biggest problems too, is when you're in crisis, it's you don't know what your options are. You're just trying to put one foot in front of the other. And people can even tell you options and it just flies right over your head. Because it's not fitting the narrative of the moment. And again, your health you can lose your life. You can lose your life from a domestic violence relationship by not taking care of yourself. And I've had to learn the hard way that can happen to anybody. So you have a lot of things going on this year. Can you tell me what you got coming up for 2025?
Yes. So those of us who are in the U.S., or I should say it's probably a worldwide thing, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And so we have quite a few events coming up. Those will be on our website. But we are actually going to do our first public forum around R.A.F.T. We want to hear what the community has to say. We want to hear other people and other folks and other agencies who might be interested in starting their own R.A.F.T program. We're inviting them to hear more. And then we're also going to hear from some folks that have been through the program. So what is it actually like to go through the R.A.F.T program? So that's probably one of the biggest things. And then other things that we have in the works that aren't quite publicly out yet will show up on our website at the next couple of months.
Well, I am so impressed. We all work so hard to try to bring awareness and prevention to a variety of issues with domestic violence. I focus on financial abuse, which is a domestic violence issue.
Yes.
But it's so huge. I had no idea that when looking at the domestic violence field, that it is so significant and difficult to keep afloat because so much of it is nonprofit, if not almost all of it. And for your R.A.F.T program, just going back for a minute, is that funded separately or is it just all fall under the same umbrella?
So it is funded. The answer is both and. We have had to get funding from private entities and foundations who really want to look at innovative projects. And so that is really where we've got our seed funding. We do have some funds that come in from realignment programs. So previously incarcerated folks do serve a lot of them through this program. And so we do have also some general nonprofit traditional funding from that source as well.
Well, I'm going to ask you a couple questions that I like to ask all guests.
Yes.
And you are certainly a wealth of wisdom. What is your tip for someone who's under financial abuse or any other form of domestic violence, who hasn't taken any steps or is afraid to take that first step?
I think the biggest tip that I would say, and this is going back to thinking back to when I was in a domestic violence situation and financial abuse was a large part of my story. Reach out for support because you're not alone. You may think that you're alone. You may feel unequivocally that you are unique and alone, but you are not alone and you don't have to do this by yourself.
For sure. And what is your tip for someone who is out recently of a domestic violence situation, but they don't know what to do next to try to start recovering?
I also, am thinking back to when I very first got out of the DV relationship. And I think I felt very lost. I felt like, okay, I have to completely almost scrub down and erase everything about my old life and completely start over again. And I would say that the first thing to do is put yourself first. So similar to what we were just talking about, what are your needs? And sometimes that need is I just need to breathe. Sometimes it's I need to get my health checked out. Sometimes it's I need a friend or a community. I would say check in with yourself and really take inventory about what is going to feel helpful for you. And if you don't know, that again, it kind of goes back to the first tip, seek support. Because there is a whole community of us out here ready to help, even just the simple day-to-day, like, what do I do with my life now? And so I think the tips are kind of one and the same. Reach out. We're here. We are happy to help, and you're not alone. Joy also gets ruined. And that's oftentimes a lot of the healing is like, how do I actually live in the joy and allow that to be a part of my life as well? So I discovered so much debt in my name at the end of my relationship. And I had to, file bankruptcy at a very young age, and discovering all of these things that had happened. I thought, well, there's no way I'll ever own a house. There's no way that I'm ever going to be able to finance a car. Like all of these dreams of having things and success was just completely dashed. And so don't know what those dreams are anymore because of the damage that has been done.
And you've lost your identity. What very often happens is they cannibalize your identity.
Yes.
And even your friends, even your whole identity and all your accomplishments suddenly become theirs as well.
Yes.
And you become very confused as to whether you ever accomplished things in the first place. And
absolutely.
You've been gaslit to such an extreme, but it's really hard to go back and go, well, who was I really?
Yeah.
And I can see why Ruby's place is so critical for that.
I think when people hear domestic violence, they automatically go to the violence part of it, and really still in this day and age, think about it as that physical piece. And yes, we've come around to think about the mental and emotional, but when you get into things like financial abuse, it's like, well, yeah, but how does somebody actually financially abuse you, kind of thing. And it's hard for people to wrap their minds around. But then when you tell your story of, well, my partner's took my literal identity, opened up all of these accounts in my name, and then defaulted on all of them. I had no idea. They start to kind of get that picture of like, oh, wow, I didn't even know that was a possibility. Or like what you said, Lori, they were taking half of my paycheck. General people who don't think about doing harm are going to be like, oh, well, I didn't even think somebody would do that or could do that, especially in, a partnership or a married situation. Don't think that it occurs to people. And it is very real, and it is incredibly damaging and long lasting as well.
It can be permanent. It could actually do more long-term damage to your future than other forms of domestic violence because it really strangles your choices.
Yes, it does.
And you can literally not recover in your lifetime. That is one of the most difficult things about recovery from any kind of domestic violence is where you are financially.
Yes.
And you may not have necessarily been under financial abuse in that relationship. You were under, let's say, emotional abuse, physical abuse, but somehow money always plays into this.
Oh, it absolutely does. And I think that I remember telling my story more to debt collectors and the bank and the bankruptcy lawyers and the court about my domestic violence situation than even the police in terms of like the physical violence that I had experienced. And then to have them not believe me that like, oh, well, she's just telling this story to get out of it. You know, she just did all of this and now she's coming up with this kind of wild story was so disheartening. And then I thought, oh, there really is no hope. Like there's no way that I'm actually going to come out of this, be able to rebuild my life. So financial abuse is absolutely real and very traumatic and damaging. And then you have to rebuild your relationship with money, which is like that is a whole therapy journey in itself. And we are here to like untangle the ball of yarn that is that trauma.
Well, I'm sure grateful that you were here today, Sophora. I am so excited to have had you on the show. And I'm going to lobby right now. I want you to come back and tell your story, if you will. I want to give you an open invitation to
Absolutely.
come back.
I would be honored to come back and talk about my story.
I'm going to hold you to it. Sophora, I am so thrilled to have had you on the show. And once again, you have been listening to Sophora Acheson. She is the executive director and co-board president for Ruby's Place in the Bay Area of Northern California. If you are an organization listening and would like to learn more about the R.A.F.T program, I'm going to put all the links for the R.A.F.T program and all the other programs that Ruby's Place offers. And I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Lori.
And you've been listening to Speaking Out on Financial Abuse.